S2G invests across 3 different sectors: sustainable food and agriculture, oceans, and energy. I represent oceans. And in our perspective, the ocean is really on the front lines of some of the major shifts and tensions that are forming our current and future modern world. I mean, if you think about some of the big things happening, the maritime industry, which ships and moves 80% of the world's goods every year, is under an extreme amount of pressure with tariffs, a trade war. There are increasing regulations at the international level through the IMO, International Maritime Organization, but then increasingly layered regulations popping up in different regions around the world that's pushing them to decarbonize and find energy efficiency by 2050. And then a lot of the geopolitical tensions that flare up globally start at sea. So we've all tracked the piracy and Houthi rebels and issues in the Suez Canal. That all impacts that sector. When we think about the seafood sector, it's a $400 billion sector. They, for decades now, have been facing the declining fish populations because their current environment can't sustain their life. We're overfishing our seas. They've had to find new ways to literally produce protein. It's the most recent industrialization of an animal protein in generations. And now aquaculture makes up more than 50% of the seafood consumption globally. So there's a lot of dynamics at play where the ocean is the kind of front and center. A participant is being impacted by all these things happening. And then one thing that we will spend some time talking about is really the climate itself. I think when most people, I don't know if this is a true statement, I have an assumption that when people think about the oceans related to climate, they think hurricanes, flooding, things, extreme events related to water. But something that we don't talk a lot about is actually how the currents of the ocean drive global climate. So drought, which leads to fires, the ocean is truly impacting everything. I think most people understand that the ocean is a powerful climate engine. It directly drives or amplifies extreme weather events through heat transfer, moisture flux, and atmospheric interactions. As atmospheric temperatures further warm our oceans, we've all heard this, we can expect increased frequency, intensity, and unpredictability of extreme weather events. And when we think about the ocean's role in climate events, hurricanes, flooding, et cetera, it has bigger impacts. And one of the things that you'll hear about in our war game is what we call AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. It is essentially a big vertical loop in the Atlantic Ocean of currents that regulates the weather, essentially, and the climate, and predominantly in Europe or for any country along the Atlantic. And as the temperature rises and our ice caps are melting at a faster rate, which I think we hear both of those things a lot. I think that the data is there, it is happening. The melting of that fresh water rushes into the Atlantic, and it doesn't allow, the mixing of the fresh water with the salt water kind of puts it all into imbalance. And it can change this whole dynamic here, and it essentially can flip global climate on its head, where Europe, some of the breadbaskets of Europe will become very, very cold, and so may not be as productive. The polar ice cap, where the Arctic waterways, which currently have been bound up by ice, all of a sudden we have new trade routes going through there. There's new mineral deposits, new fisheries, resources that haven't been exploited before because they haven't been accessible. And so it not only the weakening of AMOC not only can actually turn weather patterns and climate on its head so that where we each live globally changes fundamentally, but also it opens up parts of the world that have never been accessible before and that are resource rich and creates a lot of geopolitical tension. And that, we'll ask Sarah about this because I'm not gonna know the answer, but AMOC weakening is a thing that is happening. It is not a hypothetical. And we're seeing impacts of that today. And with the increasing severity of weather events, again, things we hear, but I don't know if we see the statistics, there's increasing economic losses from these extreme weather events. So On the left here, you can see that the average losses, particularly from 2020 to 2024, the annual losses from severe weather events is over $300 billion. On the right, you can also see where 60% of those losses in 2024 were uninsured. So there's hundreds of billions of dollars of value that is being lost and impacting corporations and businesses and individuals. And they're either not being covered by insurance, or insurance is not able to meet the demand of the need for a lot of reasons, again, that Sarah has written about. And again, things that we hear, but as things get hotter, as bread baskets no longer can be as productive, as water scarcity increases, there's mass migration, mass climate migration, and there's geopolitically, there's a lot of internal displacements happening globally. I think that we hear about it all day long, all the time, about people leaving their countries. Mostly we hear about conflict, but increasingly there's climate migration that is happening, because where they are living, or where they hope to be in 10 years isn't going to be possible anymore. We're also experiencing a lot of geopolitical fallout, some of this related to climate, some of it not, but I would say some of the climate events that we are anticipating are really driving some of the patterns that are just going to get worse and worse. Over here, so BRICS, this is a alliance of emerging countries who essentially were formed to rebalance Western influence on a number of fronts: geopolitics, trade, economics, etc. This, as this alliance grows, it is increasingly going to be 30% of global GDP, represent 46% of the population, 43% of oil production, and 25% of exported goods. So we are seeing alliances, strategic alliances coming together that over time will become incredibly powerful and incredibly influential. Doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it is the creation of a new world order that we are not set up today to manage. And then on the flip side, when you think about GDP growth over the next couple of decades, most Western countries are declining in ranking in their GDP growth, while a lot of the countries that are part of BRICS are expanding and increasing and climbing in rank. So these are, again, none of these things good or bad. It's just what it is. These are the trends, and the data supports it. But it's how do we manage the complexity of major climate events, geopolitical alliances shifting, and new opportunities? How do we seize all of that and really think about it in a new world of volatility and adaptation? As all these things shift, corporations and businesses have to really think about how they think about resourcing their organizations, where they move towards. And there's a tendency, when you think about the economic policy of governments across the geopolitical relations, there's a lot of indicators that people are trending towards more Cold War behaviors. So more protectionist, isolationist, when it comes to building strategic initiatives. And resource nationalism. I think we see this, we experience it. It's in the news a lot, but people are really thinking about how if our alliances are fraying, if our friends are or not our friends anymore, or if I'm not going to be able to access that critical mineral, that's going to be harder, I'm going to pay tariffs. People are really either turning inward or building new relationships to access and kind of land grab on critical minerals and resources for the future. Just an added tension. And then the new front lines. So strategic terrain and technology. One of the things that we'll introduce in the war game is essentially, with the climate event, the northern routes of the Arctic really opening up, and what that makes possible and the challenges that it's going to present. There's going to be more efficient shipping routes that is going to make the Suez Canal not as frequented in certain seasons. There are new fisheries, critical minerals in the seabed, and et cetera, that are going to be, in the Arctic. It's an alliance of nations, and some of those alliances are tenuous, and so there's going to be we have seen increased militarization of the Arctic, and also kind of people not land grabbing, but really trying to put their stake in the ground.